Hi, everybody. Thank you all for making me so welcome this morning, and it's lovely to be joining you. To what Lucian just said is, do folks feel like they could do some writing this morning? Certainly no pressure, and if we do write something together, there'll be no pressure to share. But I did want to, at some point, while I'm visiting with you this morning, talk a little bit about teaching and in the context of having that be part of the experience of being a writer, that that in addition to writing your own work, the sort of whether or not we should also be thinking of it as a given that if you're going to be a writer, that part of that might entail a responsibility to help a writer near you, to do some writing. That if you can take two poetry workshops, you can give back one. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what it means to be giving a writing exercise to somebody else, and what in fact is going on with a good writing exercise, what kind of thinking it requires, and in the hopes that, of course, that if you aren't already offering workshops, that maybe you would consider doing that. Even if it's you one-on-one with a friend who's jammed up and feels like they have writer's block, and or if you would ever, be willing to, get 4 or 5 people together in a room and take turns being in charge. But anyways, more about that in a little bit. I'd like to read you some poems, and then I'll segue into some stuff about teaching. Whenever I have the opportunity to share some poems with folks, I always like to start off with a couple of pieces by somebody else. Real quick, I'd like to start with a poem by our departed Holly Prado, who was a wonderful figure in Los Angeles poetry and creative writing circles. She has a very short poem called The Garden, and it goes like this. Rilke has said that each man will take with him from the earth one word he loves best. I've been thinking all day, just in case, and can't go beyond lizard. Which in a funny way, I feel is sort of the same thing, only different, as we say in poetry. To William Butler Yeats, and he wishes for the bright cloths of heaven. Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half light, I would spread the clothes under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. All right. To start off with, this first poem is short, and it's for anybody that lives with an animal, a cat or a dog, or perhaps a bird, or if you have a free-range goldfish. This poem is in 3 short sections, and I always feel like it's a it, it can always give an audience pause when you say your poem's in numbered sections. It's like, oh God, how long is this going to be? This is not a 26-part poem about the alphabet. This is just short little sections. This is called 3 Paintings Eaten by Dogs. 1. A woman in a straw hat, ribbon trailing, eyes lost in shadow. She waves from a beach to where a sky should be, but isn't. There is half a cloud. There is one wing. 2. A man with white hair, a blue suit and necktie. He looks at us, ready to answer any question not found in the books behind him. Don't be alarmed by his missing chest, his pulverized desk. These are his credentials. And three, because you've got to have a landscape. A mountain pass, late winter. Pine trees loaded with snow, gone pink at evening. They lean away from an awesome hole in the world, so big you can see its skeleton, wet, flimsy, put together in a rush. We might have known. Okay. This is fairly recent. Um, my first book, uh, my first full-length collection of poems, whatever that means, came out in 2009 and concerned itself with guns. And I had not thought that guns were going to be a repeating theme in my work, but they've kept showing up, much as they do in our daily lives. Um, and I really thought I was done with guns as a sort of catalyst for poetry, but it's kept up, and this is fairly recent. I don't think any warnings are required for this poem, though. This is called Active Shooter. It takes 12 minutes to start my mother's day, from the time I wake her to when I set a tray of coffee, toast, a soft-boiled egg. One American will be shot in that time, and two more before I clear it all away. This morning, I find her already wakeful, taking aim with a black remote. On her bed-sized television, the words active shooter caption a pair of school flags and policemen crouched in a sandbox. My mother says the words aloud. 12 minutes later, our telephones buzz with ads for active wear. Should I buy her a bulletproof shawl? It's $40, soft, elegant, tactical, good for seniors on the run. Someday there'll be more of us in poems than anywhere else. I wonder if I'll be told to carry a gun as a school teacher, which is to say, I wonder what quitting will be like. Will I be able to live on what I've made? How long before the world is American? The TV has filled with mothers. I blink and realize I'm late with breakfast, late to cut bread, grind beans, late to boil water and place a bright egg in the middle. My mother repeats the words as I step away, keeps saying them, like playing out a rope for me to follow back to her. Soft, elegant, tactical. Dear God of the gas stove, dear clock of blue fire, thank you for what darkens in us every day. Lately, I've become sort of fascinated by uh, the latest sort of trends in language, the kind of the meme length uh, that were of the sort of I guess I would almost say that the parataxis of memes and texting and the bites in which we've been getting information lately and which we've become accustomed. Uh, and in an effort to sort of explore that and see what it's like to sort of inhabit it as a poet, I went through, a handful of websites and social media accounts that had quote unquote interesting facts. And I took two uh, and thought I would create a litany of them. Um, I took two and then I made up all the rest. This is called Any Given Time. Many supermarket apples are already a year old. Some of the oldest cultures have no word for mud. The miniature horse is the only other mammal known to enjoy gossip. 60% of babies born in the United States can identify one suspect. Most handguns do not recognize their owners. The first road signs were apologies. 80% of all nocturnal discourse is held within hearing of a moth. It is impossible to hum while holding your nose, but easy to sing. There are strangers who have watched you eat and still think about it. Love often appears in X-ray photography as a cloudy, indistinct area. This sentence is beautiful. May I please go ahead of you? I just have this one oyster. At any given time, there is a long line of ghosts waiting to whisper in your ear. Some, when finished, immediately head for the back of the line to go again. Others say only one thing and join other lines. Okay. I'm gonna, not that many more. We'll do just a few more, and then maybe we'll get into um, uh, some notes on teaching, and maybe we'll do some writing together. I would like that. Um, it's my way of sort of inserting an opportunity to do some writing today with all of you. Uh, Another recent one, and there's some things that are going to come up in this poem. I guess what I'll do is I guess I'm going to do uh, a couple of poems of civil service. There'll be one here for firefighters and one for police. This one, first one is for police, and I've taken the uh, the the painting term for turning two dimensions into three. The trick of the eye, that trompe l'oeil, as the title of this piece, about a different kind of 3D rendering. Trompe l'oeil. Who was first to trace a dead body in chalk? No one seems to know. One book says it started as a courtesy for the press, a way to photograph a murder without the murder. But who was first to do it? And why did they have chalk with them that day? It isn't procedure anymore, as it contaminates the scene. But an officer told me sometimes people go ahead and trace the body before he even gets there. They've seen it on TV and think it helps. He says police call this a visit from the chalk fairy. This is true. And once he said there was a witness who couldn't find anything to trace with, so he used popcorn and candy, which he later recovered and ate during questioning. I can't decide if that's artistic genius or just the loneliest thing I've ever heard. Nor can I stop thinking about that first man because, of course, it was a man who took chalk from a sandwich board or a frightened bartender. I can see him, a beat cop, bored but earnest, a young man with time to kill, while a village doctor dressed in the dark and drove to town. They really do. They really call that a visit from the chalk fairy. It happens with enough frequency. Uh, it's an amazing statement on life in the 21st century, I have to say. Okay. And this one, as I mentioned, is for firefighters. This is called Oxygen. When the hills catch fire, the crews have no choice but to attack from below. You don't want to be higher, they say. That's how you feed yourself to it. Even so, the fire can still fight back, loosening the ground around trees and boulders so they come crashing down. The fighters learn this in fire school. Of course, it's harder at night. They can only listen for whatever the fire may drop. So they go slow and call out to each other. Rock, tree, animal. And since it's always night somewhere, always out of control, one can imagine them right now, walking up the dark like gods or children, naming the world as it comes for them. Okay, I'm gonna pivot now and segue into teaching. I'm going to share a very, very short epistle with you as my means into talking about teaching. I do a lot of teaching. I work in colleges. I work with people who are coming back to writing after a long spell. I work with children regularly. My school year is about to start, and before the end of the month, I'll return to high school, where I work with middle schoolers and high schoolers. And also for the last few years, I've been working with people who have aphasia and traumatic brain injuries. And more, I'm discovering that a room full of writers is just a room full of writers, regardless of where they come from or their level of experience. But I want to share with you a letter I got from a middle schooler. We were doing a writing project where I gave all of the children index cards. And I said, we're going to create a fantastic beast with these cards. We're going to create a kind of chimera. And each card had a different heading. One card said its wings, and another card said its tail, and another card said, its fur, and another card said its teeth, and so on. And I said, okay, everybody, you're going to write a simile for each aspect of this creature. We don't know what the creature is, but we're going to put all your cards together and decide, what it is. And they all did it. And they ultimately decided, once they'd created this incredible creature, that the animal was in fact the year 2022. But this one boy named Ethan didn't have his simile on time. And I said, well, email it to me. So he just had to email me a simile. But of course, I guess at some point in the process, he realized he was writing to a teacher and that it had to be a letter. So this is from Ethan last December. Dear Brendan, its shoulders are like clouds which the sun hides behind, except the clouds are the shape of a dolphin surfing. Sincerely, Ethan to Vivian. It's the sincerely, I think, that makes it art. You know what I mean? It's just, anyway, this is my favorite letter I've received in a very long time. Okay, this is it's a poem about teaching poetry. And the title of this poem is the inspiration for the class that day. On this one particular day, I was working with the kids, and you may remember this headline. It would have appeared on CNN, on all of our telephones last February. So the poem is about seeing this headline and trying to use it as a prompt in class. The poem is called "Meanwhile, a cargo ship full of luxury cars is on fire and adrift in the middle of the Atlantic." CNN, February 17th. My students don't want to write today, so I tell them I'll let them go early if first they'll sit a moment, eyes closed, and listen to this headline from the news. Isn't that lovely, I ask. Read it again, they say, and slower. Meanwhile, a cargo ship full of luxury cars is on fire and adrift in the middle of the Atlantic. Says one girl. I wish we didn't have eyes. Her best friend nods. Totally. A boy opens his laptop and starts to type, his fingers like a small animal trying to run on a polished floor. It just gets better, doesn't it? Meanwhile, a cargo ship full of luxury cars is on fire and adrift in the middle of the Atlantic. Everyone is writing now, even the girl who wished she was blind. Imagine it, I say. The cars all melting together into a kind of rich lava. And are there seagulls, I wonder, flying in and out of the smoke, white on black? Everyone is safe, I say. The crew jumped ship. It's like a giant funeral barge for a king or... Stop talking, says the best friend. I need to think of a rhyme for Egypt. Class ends late, with students reading aloud as they walk into February's paper sun. And meanwhile, and finally, my last poem, and I thank you for your attention here, is because it's this month will mark 2 years since my father passed away, and I'm gonna share a poem with you that he liked and that he used to about which he used to give me advice. I'm going to read a short poem about teaching poetry, and it's a villanelle. And you know, I know I've got a room full of poets, but my dad always said I needed to explain this to an audience, that because it was a villanelle, there were lines that were going to repeat. And I said, why? Why do I need to tell the audience that? And he said, because otherwise people will think you forgot you said that line already and that there's something wrong with you. So anyway, this poem is called Cold Reading. It's really cold in here now, easily 40 below something, and half the class is asleep. Snow dazzles in the windows, makes a cake of each desk. It's really cold in here now. I've been lecturing on the same poem for 26 hours, and half the class is asleep. I want them to get it. I start to talk about death again, and it's really cold in here now. One student has frozen solid, her hair snapping off in the wind, and half the class is asleep. See that, I say? Lisa gets it. But it's so cold in here now, half the class are white dunes shifting to the sea. Okay, so I thank you very much for your attention there, and for the wonderful smiles and nodding that I was getting from folks. It's enormously encouraging. I was going to say you have no idea. Actually, I'm sure you have. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There's nothing like feeling like you've connected with an audience, and I also feel as though more and more it means more and more to me. I think one of the most popular criticisms right now of our age is that there's so much competing for our attention, and that most of it is nonsense, which with which I could not disagree more. Actually, I think there's a great deal competing for our attention, and much of it is quite urgent. And the fact that you are all spending a perfectly good Saturday with with each other, celebrating poetry and with the gift of your attention, I'm moved by it, and I thank you for it. If you've ever had a poetry writing workshop with me, and I know there are a couple of you who have, there are certain things I say every class, and at this point you could probably accompany me on the guitar. But I emphatically believe that most of the time, writer's block is not a shortage of imagination. It's not a shortage of good ideas. It is almost always a surplus of judgment. You're just editing before anything hits the page. The idea is new, and And so it makes sense to me that that we might look at our first ideas and go, hey, I've heard that before. I can see where this is going already. We look at the blank page and we go, the, no, everybody begins the, when, and nothing hits the page. And of course, what we have to do every time is just jump in and jump in and jump in. In Richard Hugo's wonderful book, The Triggering Town, he talks about how every poem has two subjects. There's the subject that gets you writing, and then, of course, there's the subject that is discovered in the process of writing. And he also says, and I believe he's quoting his mentor, Theodore Roethke, when he talks about how most good writing prompts are really a fake problem. I'm giving myself or a class problem to solve. If I say to them, here's a list of words, try to use as many of them as you can in a poem, or try to approach a subject in this way and then turn it on its head by the end of it, or any one of a number of different formats that we recognize for a good poetry prompt. And by solving that fake problem, the real problem diminishes. I'm focused on just joining these two dots, and then I realize that the real problem has vanished. And sometimes the more complex the prompt, that is, the more little fake problems there are in it, the bigger the opportunity comes for a much larger and expansive poem, at least in theory. I feel like one of the easiest things to do, as far as, particularly if we have writer's block, if we feel like we can't get past our own preconception or expectations of what should land on the page, one of the best remedies for that is to go help another writer, who's equally jammed up. I guarantee you things will start to loosen up for you. I don't presume to be telling you something that I think you don't already know. But rather, I hope, but I have found it encouraging to highlight some of these things. So I'd like to give you a couple of things to try this morning, if you're interested in. I want to give you one prompt, and I'd like to, Lucien, I want to be careful with the time here, because I don't remember exactly how long the event was supposed to go, and I want to make sure I'm not exhausting the time. Can I give folks a 5 to 6 minute prompt? Do I have time for that? And then to be able to talk about it afterwards?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I'd like you to do, and I'll talk to you about why we're going to do this afterwards, after you've had a chance to write. If you don't feel like writing this morning, I beg your pardon. I hope you'll give this a shot anyway. At the very least, maybe meditate on what I'm going to give you, because it will also work as a thought exercise. And I realize that I'm in a room full of, like I say, professional poets. I'm not, I'm talking to you one writer to another. I'm not giving myself airs here. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think of an entity in nature, non-human. The older, the better. It could be the moon, it could be an ocean, it could be a star, it could be a virus, it could be something truly ancient in that regard. It could be a tree, it could be a flower, it could be a mountain. Doesn't matter what it is, so long as it's not a person. And I want you to conduct a short interview. I would like you to ask it a question and then let it answer. You're going to write the question, you're going to address it, and how you set it up is up to you. Personally, I don't think you have to say, I don't think you have to set it up like I was taking a walk and I looked up at the moon and I thought I would see. I think you can just jump in with your interview. You're going to ask this entity in nature a question, then you're going to write its answer, then you're going to ask it another question, and you're going to let it answer. And I think in the time that we have, you could probably get in like 3 questions. And here's the only other constraint on what you're going to write. It has to end in the entity's voice. If you're interviewing the moon gets the last word. You can't end it by walking over, and then pondered what it meant. Like, no, the last words of the poem are in the voice of the thing that you were interviewing. So it gets the last word in the poem. Could we try that for about 6 minutes? Would that be all right? Could we do that? And if you want more time, I bet we can take a couple of minutes, but I'm going to mute myself. If you want to turn your cameras off and write, I'm going to set a little timer here for about 6 minutes. We'll see how far we get. And what the hell? We'll call it 7 minutes. I'm going to give you 7 minutes. Just relax. I'm going to turn my camera off so that you don't have to watch me chew. But I can hear you. If anybody has a question, call out to me. 7 minutes starting now.
One eternity later.
Okay, my little timer is going off. Is there anybody who would like to plead for another minute or so? You can hold up a hand here. Otherwise, we can start moving it along. Of course, you can leave your cameras off if you want to keep working, or, you're certainly not required to be looking into the camera at me while we proceed. If you want to keep your head focused on your page, that's fine. One of the things that's interesting to me about a prompt like this, the longer I do this, I have to say, my understanding of our relationship with metaphor changes all the time. The answers I would have given you if you'd asked me about metaphor and the nature of metaphor and how metaphor works, the answers I would have given in my 20s are very different than the answers that I would give now. The principle hasn't changed, but my understanding of it has changed over and over. And my appreciation of it, for the size of what metaphor grants us, only gets more profound. I was talking to Lucien before our session officially began this morning, and I was telling him about visiting a class in Palm Desert, some high schoolers. I'd been asked to join a kind of intro to poetry class, and we were talking to the students about what a poem is. And I made the terrible mistake of just throwing quotes at the kids by other authors, what they'd all said about what poetry was. Howard Nemerov saying that it was a way of seeing invisible things and saying unspeakable things about them. Auden's idea that it was a verbal object. Carl Sandburg's often paraphrased statement that it was an echo asking a shadow to dance, and so on and so forth. And none of these quotes are helping the children at all. They're pretty, but they're not making anything any clearer. And I'm only making it worse. I get all the way to Jean Cocteau, and I'm saying, well, in Cocteau's diaries, he says, "Beauty makes us lose our heads. Poetry is born of this decapitation." Which again is a fascinating statement, but it doesn't help. And then finally, this 12th grader, a girl named Gabrielle Baez, said, "Well, I think that people who write poetry give themselves a voice no one would dare interrupt." And I've been thinking about that for years now. At the time, I reacted right away, going, "Wow, that's a hell of a statement." But I knew even then that there was more to it than I was able to understand immediately. And I've noticed that when I'm working with writers, and this is all circling back to what we just did, and and how certain kind of baseline when you're creating a prompt for another writer, to sort of shoot for, okay, what sort of area of thinking, will best help somebody to actually get something to land on the page. I'm really interested in the authority that metaphor grants us. If you're asking a room full of people, to identify a poem and say, okay, what about a particular piece of writing makes it a poem? And I'd say, well, it uses meter, or it has rhyme, or it has really obvious line breaks, or these kinds of things that sort of identify a poem as a poem. And one of the things that we don't tend to pinpoint is the poet's relationship to the declarative sentence. And that is such a unique relationship. you could say that prose writers have it to some degree in magical realism and genres like that, but nobody really has it like the poet. I mean, if I'm writing you a love poem and I say, as Lorca did, mil cabalitos persas se dormían en la plaza con luna de tu frente. I, in the middle of a love poem, say, 1,000 Persian ponies fell asleep in the moonlit plaza of your forehead. In any other mode of writing, I've just changed genres. Now I'm writing science fiction, apparently. Apparently, I'm in love with somebody so massive that ponies could sleep on their heads. But in poetry, we know that nothing has changed. It's still this world. I'm still talking about love as we all know it, as something huge and all consuming. So consuming that when you're in love with somebody, every inch of that person is a territory. You know, even this space on their forehead as they sleep next to us, bathed in moonlight, could be a Persian plaza where ponies are sleeping. And don't get me started on the sports arena of your stomach kind of thing, you know. But and there's more to say about this. But before I do, would somebody like to share what they wrote? I'd love to hear from a couple of people if we could. Is there anybody that feels like reading what they wrote, their interview? Anybody? Nobody is stepping up.
Okay.
Have I been muted this time? Oh, okay. I was gonna
I'll step up because I caused this damn thing to happen. So I've got to speak up. I have a responsibility.
Okay, and then it looks like Michael raised his hand too. So after you, we'll hear from Michael. And
okay, this is Interview with Moss on a Rock.
oh, great.
Why are you so soft, yet insist on clinging to something so hard? I started out by reaching for the silent pond. It never reached back. It's so hard to hug what doesn't hug back. An ache, the ache of reluctance, I suppose, pillories your affection. Why do you speak with a British accent? When you find yourself speaking to moss on a rock, don't question the accent. Believe me, that's the least of your worries. Why did you agree to this interview then? I never agreed. Just because you ask a question doesn't mean the answer it provokes belongs to you. Moss leans back, curling itself into what resembles a smile when I smile, resembles a frown when I frown. Let me give you some polite advice, young man. Quit seeking answers. Be still and let the hardest questions find you.
Luciana Sell is in the house, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Welch.
Yes, hi. We met at AWP. I was with Lucian that time.
That's right.
And I took your picture with Lucian together. Lucian, could you enable screen sharing?
Yes, just a moment. There it is.
Okay, this is what I came up with. And thank you. It's great to have a prompt that just immediately got me going. And I don't know about the title, but this is what I have so far. Knock on wood. Hey, backyard tree, what kind are you? Tree? I didn't know there were different kinds. You look coniferous. I hope it isn't catching. What are you doing today? Same as ever, working on my latest growth ring. How about you? I suppose the same. Is it hard? You tell me. Yes, come to think of it. But really, I want to know what you think. I'm a tree. Well, okay, tell me about your family. My great-grandfather was a nurse log. Lucky him. Anything else? Well, we don't speak much. You mean with your grandfather? No, my whole family. We're trees. But you have strong roots. Doesn't everyone? Even if they don't know it? I suppose so. Any parting words? Parting words? Why do we need to part?
Rock and roll. Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, when that flashed on the screen too, I was like, "Holy crap, Michael!" I mean, You got busy. That sucker looked like it was ready to send out. I mean, that was nuts. Okay, is there anybody who has been made bold by our first two sharers, who wasn't going to share and it feels like sharing it? Elizabeth, Ken, anybody feel like going? Lisa? Oh, it looks like I've got
Larry, yeah.
Larry, Merry Christmas, Larry. I'd love to hear from you.
So mine is a Japanese maple. Isn't it thrilling for you to change colors so vividly? It just happens. It's not always such a thrill for me. What do you think of the woman who brings me out here in the morning to pick those high bush blueberries near you? She's swell and more gentle than you with the berries. Why is the other Japanese maple so muted in her changes of color? She's shy, but she has other ways. Just let me see. She's just shy, but she has other ways. No, she's just more subtle. Pay more attention. You'll see.
Really nice. All right, I want to bring our attention to a few things that these three poets have done really, really well, and then maybe we can hear anybody that is, they're still on the fence about sharing their effort. Working with seasoned writers and working with very little children, I have to say, has proven to be not much of a stretch. And one of the things that I've noticed for those of us who find ourselves who've been writing for a long time and find ourselves, like I say, jammed up or sort of with a bottleneck of ideas. One of the things that I found in common with children is a desire for an authoritative voice. We would like to write, with any amount of confidence that, what we're saying, merits being listened to. Children, of course, truly cherish authority. And if you ever have a chance to work with kids in a classroom, a prompt like the one that we've just did, with the one that we've just done, I think can usually yields pretty amazing results. And I think one of the reasons for that is this. And as I say, Lucian and I were talking about this as folks were coming in today. Notice that metaphor is conjured in a prompt like this without us ever having to say, this is that. I haven't had to make a statement that I'm saying one thing is another. I don't have to make any effort to differentiate this from simile. The moment the interviewee begins to respond, metaphor is in full swing, because of course you and I, the reader knows, well, a tree is not really answering, the moon is not really answering. They can't answer. So this voice is a metaphoric voice, and metaphor has happened that easily. Another thing to notice about this is because, as they say, if you want to see somebody's true face, give them a mask. Once we are speaking on behalf of this other entity, what's kind of interesting about this is that means for the entire time we're speaking on behalf of these things, be it moss, be it tree, the ocean, the moon, our voices are unimpeachable. What we have to say cannot be argued. It would be fruitless to argue with it. Indeed, it would be insane to argue with it. We are speaking with a really interesting kind of authority. And I think back to that student saying, this voice that no one would dare interrupt. I think that it's interesting. If we're speaking for that other thing, then we have this really interesting authority that is granted to us by metaphor. Further, one could also make the argument, interestingly enough, that where the poet can say, it is not me speaking, it is the tree speaking. And the reader can say, it is not the tree speaking, it is the poet speaking. the argument could be made that in fact both are wrong. That one is in fact speaking is an unnameable third thing. And that I came up saying, that she felt that the idea that life imitates art or art imitates life were both wrong because they were both emulations of a third unnameable thing. Lucien, when we were talking today, said, well, is it possible that that unnameable third thing is the poem itself? And I think certainly, except once you've gotten to that point, then what is the poem anymore? So when we're designing it, when we're coming up with a good prompt, I think any prompt that allows the writer that kind of wingspan, to say, okay, don't worry about this being you speaking. Don't worry about anybody arguing with this. Don't worry about criticism. I mean, if you're not paying attention in a good poetry class, sometimes you can walk away thinking that a good poem is just the opposite of all possible criticisms. And that's a harebrained way to go into writing a poem. What we really want is the freedom to go anywhere. So a good prompt, is one where the sky's sort of the limit. So, and this is of course a prompt that you can keep giving, because you can continue to speak on behalf of all kinds of things. And I think we're in safe territory doing that, if particularly when it's an entity in nature or something around you, even if it, I said an entity in nature, but I could have said it was an object around you in the room, and you could have spoken on behalf of your lamp. You could have interviewed your chair. You could have interviewed any number of these things. And then, of course, you're not at risk of objectifying anybody. I mean, if I'd made it a person, then I'm suddenly on shaky ground, because I'm imposing myself on somebody else that something else that I know has a consciousness. The lamp, my lamp is not in any jeopardy. If I speak on its behalf, it will not be humiliated or feel subjugated, or, and I can do that with some impunity. Also here, of course, repeating an exercise like this is where we also see a principle that has been pointed out to me by other poets. I was fortunate enough when I started doing this to be surrounded by some very tall trees who pointed out to me, kid, metaphor is just a gateway to compassion. If I'm wondering how the moss feels and the tree feels, with any regularity, then it's a no-brainer. Of course, I might be more ready to wonder how you feel and to be concerned with it. So this is just sort of one avenue into teaching. There's a million different ways to reinvent a prompt like this. Anything that allows your fellow writer some authority. The simplest way that I know, of course, is to just come up with prompts like where you have maybe half a sentence, and you say, okay, I'm going to put half a sentence on the board, and you've just finished that sentence however you think the sentence should be finished, and write with it, write for 5 minutes, and don't worry about what it means. I know one writer who says, the three big questions that come up all the time while we're writing is, where's this going? Is it any good? What does it mean? And she is emphatic that those three questions are none of your business. Stephen Dobbins puts it differently. He says that the act of writing is twofold. It is a combination of audacity and humility. The audacity is the actual writing. Humility is the editing, and that comes later. But the writing, the actual plunge, is all audacity, and you just jump in and do it. Is there anybody else? Elizabeth in the coffee house, Lisa, there on the tropical sands of Hampstead Heath, or Tracy, or anybody. Is there anybody that didn't get a chance to share that would like to share what they wrote? No.
Oh, well, let's see. I guess I could share a little bit. It's so interesting what you were saying just now, because mine is still, I don't know. I interviewed the swallow that lives behind my house and on a hillside. I asked it question, how does it feel to be known as the icon of the desert? And the swallow said, well, people put bullet holes through us, and they're always taking our picture, uprooting and replanting us in fancy yards or along highways where we die, separated from all we knew as children. And the questioner says, as children? We grow from seeds, very slowly, underneath our nurse trees. Mine was a Palo Verde. And so anyway, I sort of got stuck, but I found that my creature was being the fact that it's iconic makes it objectified. And so it was really interesting, the things you were saying. So.
Well, I'm glad that was useful. Anybody else? Nobody else is feeling bold. Nobody else feels like going here. Here's some other versions of the same exercise, by the way. Write about any portion of your day. Write about yourself in the third person with yourself as an animal. You'd be amazed at the results. Another would be to look around where you're living, focus on any two objects, and plan a wedding for them. The salt and pepper shakers. Isn't it about time? That they finally, came together in a holy union. And you were planning, the wedding, or, plan the funeral for some object in your home. The old reclining chair, and all the other chairs came and spoke and talked, whatever it is. The cat had a few words to say, and there's ways to sort of reinvent this. Well, do you want to, Luciana, how much time do we have?
It's so beautiful because I think I spoke earlier about accidents becoming perfect. And a perfect accident is that Garrett, who was supposed to be the other speaker today, has not shown up. And that means we have time. It means that basically this session is devoted to a magnificent poet in LA named Brendan Constantine. So let's just, I don't want to go too long, but basically,
how about,
you are free.
How about one more 5-minute thing, and then people can get on with their days. Let me give you one other prompt. Right. This is just one of the oldest prompts I've been using in a classroom. So let's say you're going to get together with another writer. And again, I'm sure some of you have already done this. Some of you have already led your own workshops. So I'm just offering up some of the stuff that has worked for me. I've always found that as soon as I walk into a classroom, before I even do the formal introduction, to get everybody just writing immediately, with the assurance that they do not have to share what they wrote, what they're about to write, rather, that for the first 5 minutes, you're just cleaning out the top layer of the kitchen drawer of your imagination. You're just gonna sweep off the top layer of junk. Maybe you'll strike gold right away, but chances are, it may just be noise that lands on the page. It doesn't matter. But to try to write continuously without stopping. And usually what I'll do is I'll put half a sentence on the board, as I mentioned. And to get everybody warmed up with that, you give them 5 minutes to just finish a sentence and keep going, and to try to keep writing. And I'll say to them, look, I really want you to try to keep writing for the entire time. Even if you feel as though you're tapped out, even if what you're writing now is, I don't know what this strange bald man expects of me, but I'm going to keep writing because he said so. Whatever it is, just keep going. So you usually start with an exercise like that before you've even really gotten into your introductions. And then perhaps next, after you've surveyed and see if anybody would like to share, you give those people who would like to an opportunity to share. The rest may want to hold on to their stuff. I advise that nobody throw away anything. You might, because chances are you may not recognize what's on the page because it's just been written. And I think one of the great one of the great fallacies of our particular profession is that we think we will recognize a good idea right away. But quite often, some of our best ideas, we have to sort of step back from them and look at them objectively, and we may not be able to do that right away. And there's chances are there will be more on the page than you think is there right away. In that same sense that, and here's another way of looking at the same blind spot. My friend Lisa is here. Lisa, when Lisa was 6 years old, Lisa was a complete human being. Lisa was not qualified in any way. In other words, she wasn't somebody who had been 5, and she wasn't somebody on her way to being 7. Lisa at 6 already had opinions, had experiences, could have given you advice on things. Likewise, Lisa at 10 was a complete human being. She was perfect. Now she could have told you all about Lisa at 6, but she was a different person. Lisa at 6 and Lisa at 10 were different. Lisa at 15 was different. Lisa at 20 was different. And we don't know what Lisa at 25 will be like. But she was, she was all of these different people, and these were all complete. Lisa now could tell you about all of those different Lisas, except in one regard. She never met any of them. Lisa Willinger has no idea what it's like when 6-year-old Lisa walks into the room, what that smells like, what that sounds like. She doesn't know what it's like to meet the 10-year-old Lisa or the 16-year-old Lisa. Likewise, I have no idea what it's like to meet any of my younger selves. I have no idea what it's like when the 56-year-old Brendan walks inside a room. I will always have that blind spot. And it will always be significant. I will have to go to other people to find out what that's like. I will have to go to other people, and we do, we turn to our best friend and go, Jesus, was I an asshole the other day? Was I talking about myself too much at that party? Was I doing this or that? And you got to go to somebody else for this kind of thing. Likewise, I think that's always true too of our first draft of anything. There's a remove that we can't achieve right away. So the first warm-up prompt, you don't throw it away, you hang on to it, you look at it a few days later. Then you get into something with more meat, like the prompt that we just did. An interview with something older than you, something non-human, an experiment and metaphor like that kind of thing. And then usually following that up with any prompt where you can really just let the writer go wherever they want. Usually the first 2 exercises will have opened up the person in an interesting way. And then they can just go to town. They will take very little nudging. You can say just write, wherever you are mentally right now. Naturally, a natural next move might also be to take a poem that you admire and share that with the person and say, okay, look at what this writer is doing, and maybe build a prompt off of an existing poem by somebody else. One of my favorite things to do is to take a poem you admire and say the opposite of whatever that poem says. Literally just turn the poem on its head. If they begin once upon a time, you start writing twice under never, and run with it. So by the time you've gotten to that point, you've conducted an entire workshop, and so long as everybody has an opportunity to share, that wants to share, you've really capped it. As Lynn Thompson, our poet laureate here in Los Angeles, says, the poem's not over. The poem's not finished until you've read it. But what I'd like to do for the next, let's say 4 or 5 minutes, is I'm going to give you one of my favorite opening prompts. It's half a sentence. Just write. Let's say, can we do 5 minutes, Lucien? Is 5 okay? Or 4? Should we can probably do this in 4 minutes.
Let's do it 5. Let's give it 5.
It's 5 minutes, and then we'll start, and then we'll wrap this up. I thank you very much for your attention today. I'm just going to give you half a sentence right now. I'm going to put it on the screen. And like I said, I want you to just finish this sentence. And there are millions of these kinds of, I call them free writes. I'm sure, you might have your own name for this kind of thing. And you're just going to run with it. If you've been in a workshop with me, you might have already had this one because I use it with groups all the time, and it's been a long time that I've been doing this. Just going to put this in a doc so I can put it on the screen. And Lucien has enabled screen sharing. So here it comes. Here is your prompt for 5 minutes from the time that I get it on the screen. You're going to finish this sentence and keep writing. We were told never to talk about. Start with that and go for 5 minutes.
5 million years later.
Believe it or not, that's our 5 minutes. As I said, nobody's under any pressure to share this. Chances are, though, you've probably gone somewhere pretty interesting. And a half a sentence prompt like this quite often, because it's an unfinished thought, usually brings its own momentum with it. Even if you have trouble getting a second and third line, chances are you absolutely got a first line. And if you ask, any writer line, you're off to the races. Like I said, really no pressure with this one, but I'd love to hear from somebody. Did anybody want to be one of the last voices we hear this morning? Maybe somebody who hasn't shared already. Just you don't even have to worry about reading the whole thing. Is there any part of what you just wrote that you think is kind of cool? Oh, yes, that looks like Randy.
Yeah,
Randy.
I wrote them. We were told never to talk about why we couldn't get to sleep. Well, we weren't explicitly told not to talk about it, but that message was conveyed to me by my parents' lack of curiosity.
Very telling indeed. Oh, wow. Ken, Tracy, anybody? Anybody want to read? Oh, that looks like Ken.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I just want to say how interesting it is/was that these two prompts fit together so nicely for me.
Oh, right on.
I chose not to read from the first one, although I will tell you that it was a conversation between the last human and planet Earth. And, it was a plea, let's say, from the last human to his mother. Mother, why? And the child is pleading for just another 5 minutes, or in lieu of that, another eon or two. But what struck me was the second prompt was simply another way for the human child, in this case, to address the Mother Earth. We were told never to talk about you as a real thing, as a feeling thing. We were told you were merely object, not really subject, etc. And so I just want to throw that out as another way of looking at prompts, especially when there are two or more in a session, that they don't always wind up being separate, but sometimes mesh very nicely. And this was great for me. Thank you.
I'm thrilled. That's wonderful. Some things that you can always try. Interestingly enough, when it comes to things meshing, I found that there are certain games I like playing in classrooms. If you have, if it's just you and another writer, or if you've got a few people, divide the room and say, all right, this half of the room are all going to write questions. And the questions must all begin with why. And this side of the room are all going to write random answers that all begin because. And nobody is allowed to see what the other is writing. So each person, say, for instance, writes 5 questions that all begin why. The other half of the room, they're all writing 5 answers that all begin because. And then you have them, you pair people up and you have them start reading back and forth to each other, rapid fire, call and response. You ask your first question, I'll give you my first answer. You ask your second question, I will give you my second answer. And you can't pick and choose. You can't try to look through your answers and see which best fits the question. You have to read them in exactly the order you've written. And chances are, like, if you're doing this with a room full of writers, the more exchanges you have, chances are you're going to get to an exchange where you're going to feel like, holy crap, we were psychically attuned. Some things are going to appear to have really lined up. Another way to play the game is to play it if I am, then I am. In other words, one half of the room writes metaphoric sentences that all begin, or rather metaphoric clauses that all begin if I am, and then they end on a metaphor. Like, if I am the lamp on my table burning, if I am a patio full of sunlight, if I am a lotus flower in between 2 hands, kind of thing. The other half of the room, they're all responding with clauses that begin, then I am. Then I am the wind talking to itself. Then I am a parking lot with no cars. Then I am a Thursday with too many clouds, or whatever it is. And then you just sort of go back and forth. You know, one person says, well, if I'm this, then the other person says, then I'm that. And you say, well, if I'm this, then the other person says, then I'm that. And it's really interesting, the sort of harmonies that will come out. That version of the game, of course, usually yields even, more, because both parties are absolutely speaking metaphorically. And the metaphors will tend to complement each other in a really interesting way. They'll also tend to make each other pop in an interesting way. The first line, the first and second lines the calls and responses will be magnified in their significance by being sort of paired. I thank you very much, by the way, for everybody's attention today, for letting me take up extra time. And I hope that you'll go out and write. I'll give you one last prompt that I've really been enjoying. We're not gonna write or anything, but just one for you to try. I'm told that this was William Stafford's daily practice, and they say all writers have sort of conditions under which they're the most comfortable writing. For instance, Albert Camus supposedly preferred to do all of his writing while standing at a lectern. Likewise, Thomas Wolfe supposedly wrote most of Look Homeward Angel. Likewise, they say that Stafford preferred to do all of his writing lying on his back, writing like this into a notebook. I mean, can you imagine, like, just writing and writing all day, like this? But what he wrote every day, because he wasn't sure if he was going to have time to do some writing, so he gave himself a bare minimum. And his bare minimum was this. All he had to do every day was write down 6 things that he remembered sensing in very short sentences, with any of his 5 senses. They would be, and the lines would be very simple language. They would be things like, the flash of gingham from my wife's dress, the smell of coffee brewing in the next room, the sound of my neighbors arguing through the wall, the feel of somebody else's house key in my hand, the taste of blood in my cheek like a black penny. I mean, it would be very, very short. But he would just write down any any 6 things that he remembered sensing with any of his 5 senses. And he didn't necessarily have to get all 5 senses in. In other words, he could write 3 for smell and 2 for touch, and 1 more for hearing on a given day. And then the next day it would be all about smell or whatever it is. But he would do this every day, and he wouldn't look at them until like at least a week. Usually by the time Friday rolled around, he'd forgotten what he wrote about on Monday. And he would start to cull the next poem out of these notes. And now that we did this, if you ever get a chance to go through a book of Stafford's work, I guarantee you'll start being able to identify poems that clearly started this way, where he's just starting very vividly with a sense right away at the top, and pulling out of it, and he's either attributing it to himself or he's attributing it to somebody else. But it probably started in this daily practice. I got to tell you, I've been doing this for a while, and it's just a very simple daily practice that absolutely yields dividends, and it's another great thing to be doing in a workshop. It's just like, we're going to sit and we're going to write down any 6 things we remember sensing over the last 24 hours, and see what we get. Chances are they may not result in a poem or something like that, but if you hang on to all of them, what you may find is what you've got is a great resource for opening or closing lines. Great closing, and since they're going to be sense-based, that means they'll all be images, and it's, and that's, always a great way to sort of leave a poem. I'm not saying it's the only way. Ralph Angel said something like, the hardest part of writing a poem is how the hell to get out of it. And, and where, how do you close that sucker? And any one of the prompts that we tried today, will have that kind of built in. Anyways, thank you for making me so welcome and being willing to play today. And thank you, Lucien, for creating this wonderful environment and inviting me to join you today. I think you're muted, Doctor.
My friend Brendan, my true friend, my soul brother friend, who I've had the pleasure to do a reading with. I've had the pleasure to meet physically only once in Seattle. And now I've had the incredible, and really, I have to say, of the 3, best pleasure of getting to really sit and hear your considerations on poetry. And they're masterful, and they're humble, and they're audacious and humble, as you described, Stephen Dobbins. I'm going to read my prompt, or my response to the prompt, because I actually felt something tingling. That's not necessarily a good sign. One piece of advice to most poets that I teach is that, you pick up rocks near a body of water, like a lake or a pond or, river or a sea, and they shine. They're very shiny because, that's just the nature of it. You put it in your pocket and you walk a little while and it tends to lose its glow. And
here we go.
That's something that I definitely have experienced. And I just want to mute whoever just silently came or interrupted. Okay, so I'm going to read that. I'm going to be audacious. And then I have one very small question, and then I have a slightly larger question. Okay, I gave this a title. Last Echo Oracle. We were told never to talk about silence, that speaking about it, even just whispering its name, would destroy it. For 48 years, I've been the wars such merciless muting caused. Silence, dear silence, I've come to call a truce. Silence, I agree. I will dutifully continue not speaking about you. In exchange, I only ask that when I no longer have a voice, a time that's coming with the ruthless weight of instant history. Soon, you will speak for me. Tell me what you've most heard me never say. Okay, the small question, my brother, is very simple. I would like to know, because it got mangled by the Zoom transmission or lack of transmission, what it was that Thomas Wolfe did when he was writing Look Homeward Angel, because I just didn't get it.
Oh, supposedly he was using the top of a refrigerator to write on. So he was so he was quite tall. You know, and it wasn't. I mean, I don't know how big the refrigerator was, but if you're writing on top of a refrigerator, back when Thomas Wolfe would have been alive to write it, I'm assuming it was probably pretty big.
Okay, so the bigger question, Wallace Stevens said, after the final no, there comes a yes. And on this yes, the future world depends. What is your yes?
Shit. What is my yes? Does it oh, I realize I can't ask for clarity on this, can I? I just have to go with what my net yes is. Uh, I'm not even sure if I understand my own yes. My impulse is do no harm. And you know, I have to say, at this age, sometimes if I'm blowing out a candle, you know, on a cake, my thoughts are you tend to be some variation of do no harm. Have another year of taking care of the people around you and doing no harm, or you know, being as honest as you can in your artwork and doing no harm with it. You know, so my yes is that I will have done no harm. Of course, I have done harm. I've done a lot of harm, uh, but but my yes is to do no harm. If that makes sense.
Thank you. It's ahimsa. It's a beautiful concept of Gandhi. You know, ahimsa is nonviolence and do no harm. And I loved, by the way, your silence before your answer. That was the one of the best parts of your answer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This has been really amazing. And the only shadow of it is that we didn't get to hear from everybody, and there are some marvelous thinkers in this group. But I think we've gone far enough, or long enough, at least.
You shared in your announcement about the reading today, Matthew's poem, who had just gotten published.
Yes.
And I went to the link and read that poem. It's a lovely poem. I was hoping Matthew was going to be here so I could tell him so. But I so enjoyed that piece. Please convey my thanks to him. That was a lovely piece that you shared.
I will be conferring with him on Monday because he's one of my students, along with Elizabeth, in fact. And I will tell him the words from the lion's mouth, which I'm sure he'll roar with for a long time.
It's a complex poem, and he's doing some difficult things typographically, his use of parentheticals and whatnot. And that I found I was able to read it cold very easily and move through it, you know, very easily through that poem, and I admired that.
Well, you've not only done no harm, you've done a hell of a lot of good today, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.